Hello and welcome to West Bloomfield 911. I'm Officer Rick, and on behalf of the men and women of the West Bloomfield Police Department, once again, welcome to another exciting show. We have a very special guest today, someone that I think you'll find very interesting. He taught the police department in our in-house training, and I found him very interesting, and he was kind enough to come on today, and that is Supervisory Special Agent Bob Beckman. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you here. Now, don't run away. We're going to highlight one of our officers today, so we'll say some nice things about him, most of it true, and then we'll come back and we'll talk.
All right.
All right? Folks, if you look on the screen, you're going to see the smiling face of Police Officer Lance O'Keefe. Lance is currently assigned to the Midnight Road Patrol, so I don't get to see him that often, and if I do, I've probably torqued the chief off. So, Lance, when you come on days, we'll spend more time together. Lance has only been here about 9 months. He hired in August of 2013. He is one of the other officers that I call the Gang of Four, and they are four dynamite officers we are very proud to have. Lance and the other three are going to be a great asset. I don't think we've hired a better group over the last few years, so we're very proud to have them and very proud that he's here with us. Lance never served as law enforcement officer before, but he is an American hero, and he did serve our country in the Marine Corps from 2004 to 2008. So Lance, we are thankful for your service to our country as a United States Marine. His favorite food, one that's pretty common in our department, pizza. And his favorite book, like the other guys in this group of four, he loves action and adventure books. And the movies, same thing, he loves his action and adventure. And when I asked him about his favorite music, he said he liked good old-fashioned rock and roll and country and western. And for you music enthusiasts, of course, you know that rock and roll was a birth child of melding of elements of country and western and rhythm and blues. So he likes that kind of stuff, and I do too. His accomplishments and hobbies, Lance said he's particularly proud of the time he served in the Marine Corps and his 2 tours in Iraq. And Lance, we're proud of you for that as well. And again, thank you for your service. When I asked him for his favorite quote, you know, with the last name of O'Keefe, he had to pick an Irishman, and he did. He picked a quote by a great Irish statesman and philosopher, Edmund Burke, and it is a very famous quote. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Lance, Edmund Burke was right, and you are right as well. So, Lance, we thank you for all you do. We hope you have many years of health and happiness here in West Bloomfield, and I'll see you back at the barn. So we're going to turn the spotlight off on Police Officer Lance O'Keefe, and we are going to do a safety tip today, folks. And today we're going to talk a little bit about computer scams. And I know Bob's got something to add to this one. He just told me, and I had not heard this, and I think it's pretty interesting. But if you are on your computer, not only do you have to worry about scams asking you for money, but you get an email you don't recognize, don't click on it. You could get a virus. It could wreck your hard drive. But a lot of emails come in requesting money, saying you've won a prize, but you have to send us money to pay the taxes on that prize, even if you never played the game. Also, they may say they're an emperor or they are a high-ranking official in the country and they have been sent out of the country and not allowed to go back to recover their millions of dollars. And once they recover the millions, they will give you a quarter of that if you just send them $20,000 to help them recover that money. Listen, anything you get in the mail, if it sounds, or in email, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And you also have to be aware of people posing as FBI agents, police officers, or whatever, and asking for money. And you know, Bob told me about one that was rather interesting today.
Sure, this is a scam that's been happening recently. We've had a lot of complaints about it, where if people are surfing for pornography on the internet, there's a virus that'll infect your computer, and it'll actually take over your webcam and take a photograph of you as you do it. And then it puts the photograph as if it were sort of a mugshot and puts that into a very realistic looking website that appears to come from the FBI or Homeland Security or some other law enforcement agency. And they say that you've been caught surfing illegal porn and that it's your first offense and you should send in $300 on a credit card and we'll let it go, that type of thing. You should know the FBI and these federal agencies never ask for money over the internet, ever. So it's just a scam. It can be very damaging to your computer to get rid of this. So got to watch where you go.
And why didn't you tell me this last week? I sent in my $300.
It's too late for you.
Oh, man. Well, listen, folks, that's good advice to heed. So listen, come on back, and we're going to talk to Bob Beckman of the FBI. He's got some great information. Come on back.
You're watching West Bloomfield 911 on Civic Center TV, a service of the Greater West Bloomfield Cable Communications Commission. For more information or to watch episodes on demand, visit civiccentertv.com/WB911. Civic Center TV, television that's close to home.
The Michigan Sheriff's Association has been on the front line of providing education, training, and programs to Michigan communities since 1877. As the only organization to officially represent the Office of Sheriff in Michigan, the MSA works toward improving professional standards to better protect the citizens. To learn more about the Michigan Sheriff's Association, call 517-485-3135 or visit misheriff.org.
Hello and welcome back. Our very special guest today is Robert Beckman, Supervisory Special Agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Bob, once again, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we met when you actually did some in-house training for West Bloomfield, and I found it rather fascinating because, well, for the obvious reason, we're both in the good guy business, but unfortunately, sometimes the good guys don't always stay good, and someone has to watch the people watching over everybody else. How'd you get involved with that?
Well, I've investigated public corruption for 17 years or so with the FBI, and I had quite a number of police corruption cases. And after seeing many of these cases play out, and they all end tragically for somebody,
right?
Very frequently for a police officer and their family. I was talking to my boss about it and said, what could we do where we could reach out proactively to police departments and try to curb some of this activity and let people know what the legal pitfalls are involved in police corruption. And so he had suggested to me, well, why don't you put on some sort of presentation? And we looked at different ways of doing that. And one of the things that I did was travel around the country to different federal prisons to interview police officers that have been convicted on some of my cases. And we have a terrific film unit in Quantico. As you know, you've seen the documentary film that they made about this. And they filmed these interviews and edited them down to a short training film that we play for police departments. So what I do is I have a PowerPoint presentation where I discuss in detail some of these cases and the specific way that people got in trouble and so forth. And I like to encourage police officers, if they know about corrupt activity, or citizens from the community, to call and report that either to an internal affairs officer within the police department or to the FBI. So I've done quite a number of these. We started that process in 2000, and I've done it all over Michigan and all over the world, different places.
Well, let me ask you, from a law enforcement standpoint, you know, there's a certain culture in law enforcement, and sometimes it can be stronger or weaker depending on your community. But we want to think that the guys we work with and the gals we work with are all, you know, outstanding people and up to snuff and playing by the rules. But, and most of the time that's true. I think the people need to know that one of the statistics I read was that less than 0.5% of all law enforcement officers end up with some sort of dirt on their badge. So that's really a very small, minute percentage. But we're also garnered with a large public trust, and that can damage the trust of the people when they see one person that's, you know, that's dirty. So how do you get people in law enforcement to sometimes, who may be reluctant to report a brother or sister, maybe they've been in gunfights with them or they've been in tough situations, they backed them up, now they have to turn that person in?
Sure. Well, what you've said is exactly correct. That the vast majority of police officers in this country, countrywide, are honest police officers and make tremendous sacrifices for the badge. And having traveled around the world and talked to other police agencies in other countries, you really realize the esteem that we're held in, American law enforcement. By and large, people realize when they call the police, they're going to get some action. Something good is going to come of that, and that's not true everywhere in the world. So how do we get police officers to report crimes? Well, it can be very difficult because, like you say, sometimes police officers, we have that thin blue line.
Right.
We're on this side of it, and sometimes law enforcement can feel like it's us against the world. You know, you have people are using weapons against you or fighting with you, or that type of thing. That breeds a camaraderie among police officers that's hard to break,
right.
even if you have a particular police officer who's doing something wrong. So what I like to do is stress a couple of things. One, my message is anybody who tarnishes their badge, they're not just tarnishing their own badge, they're tarnishing your badge. Right. And police work is different from other jobs that you might see. You know, if you have 2 bank tellers, for example, and one of them steals money from the till, well, people by and large are not going to stop trusting banks if they read about that in the newspaper. That's not, people aren't going to put money in their mattress from now on.
Right.
But when they hear about a police officer committing a crime, or perhaps lying under oath, or stealing something, or taking bribes, eventually, if you have enough of that activity and it's left unchecked, they will stop trusting the police. Yes. They'll stop calling the police to report crimes. They'll stop believing police officers on the witness stand. And that right there, when that starts to happen, the whole fabric of society comes apart.
Right.
If you can't convict criminals on the witness stand based on the word under oath of a police officer, you're in real trouble.
Yes.
Because crime is just going to spin out of control before you know it. So,
right.
We like to stress the integrity of the organization rather than the individual, and try to influence police officers to come forward with that. And the second thing is, with police officers, if you don't report crimes, because of the nature of the work, the nature of police reports, very often you'll have 2 police officers signing the same activity log, for example, or they'll write separate police reports that agree with each other in substance about what happened. And if you have, say you have one police officer who's willing to cross an ethical line, perhaps they steal some money on a traffic stop or something like that, you're necessarily putting the other officer in an ethical dilemma because they have to put something in their police report.
Right.
So that officer is the one I'm speaking to when I give these presentations. Don't put your own freedom, your family in jeopardy for somebody else who's willing to take that chance. Like you say, it's very rare, but we want to reach those cases before they get out of control.
And even though in law enforcement, a lot of people will sometimes, especially in larger agencies where you have an larger internal affairs unit, oh, you work for internal affairs, now you're the one I don't trust. Or maybe someone in your position who's coming in to investigate, you're the one I don't trust, and that's almost kind of a skewed attitude. It should be the person that's being investigated we shouldn't trust.
Sure, it's and that's a common belief among police officers, and like you say, particularly in large organizations, they'll distrust internal affairs, or they'll think people are trying to trip them up in some way, or get people in trouble for a statistic and that sort of thing. And speaking on behalf of the FBI, that's absolutely not the case. It would be perfectly fine with us if we never had to arrest another police officer, ever.
Yeah.
We could go work on something else.
Right.
There are plenty of other federal crimes going on that we can work on.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's probably not going to happen.
Right.
There's no agency that's immune to
true.
corruption, including the FBI. We recognize that too. So we put these things in place to address these things when they happen. And as these cases come up, we'll address them aggressively. But we're not out there to trip people up or harm people unnecessarily for a statistic. That's just not not who we are.
Well, years ago when I was working on the road, I remember I was going after a guy. Turned out that the case had no. The initial report came in that some guy had tried to grab a gal off the street and take her away in a car, and it was a matter of language problems, and he didn't. And she realized it afterwards, but the gist of the story was when I came up to him, he was not from the United States, he was from a Middle Eastern country, and he took off. And I ended up catching him, and he didn't speak very good English. And when I talked to him through an interpreter, the reason he ran was, in his country of origin, once the police got you, you didn't get found. And so that was the fear he had, and we don't want that type of attitude in this country.
Absolutely. I've traveled extensively in Eastern Europe and in Africa, and I've done presentations where we go and we train developing nations in their police forces and how to combat corruption. A lot of these nations that joined the European Economic Union, a condition of that was that they had to accept training from United States people would come over there and train them in how to combat corruption.
Right.
And one of the things I hear over and over again in other countries is they'll say, well, we don't call the police under any circumstances unless we absolutely have to, because it just compounds the problem. You know, the police will come and they'll ask you for money, or they'll hit you up for bribes, or they'll, you know, engage in other acts of corruption. And by and large,
once you go to jail, you don't come back
absolutely. Home. And also, regardless of what the facts are, once you get arrested and you start to get prosecuted, that's it. You know, some of these countries, particularly in the Eastern European ones that have the old Soviet style type of an investigation, once you're arrested, that's pretty much it. And if they do find any evidence that you're innocent, they send it back for further investigation while you wait in jail. You know, that's not the kind of society that we want or that we would ever recognize here. So, you know, it's very important to realize that we have among the best, not among the best, with very best police officers, in my opinion, in this country, anywhere in the world.
Well, that is good to hear, not just because I'm in the occupation, but it's good to hear for future generations.
No, it's absolutely true.
Well, let me ask you about that. I know, well, a couple things I found interesting when I was looking at your bio. One, that you did teach other police academies outside of the United States and Eastern Europe and Africa. How open are they to American-style sense of justice and law enforcement? Well,
they're open to it in terms of training. I think some of those countries have very, very limited resources. So, you know, sometimes it can be difficult to try to change a culture in a country where people are at subsistence level poverty, and you know, they're police officers and they're given authority and a badge and a gun, and you know, to try to change those minds and change people's ways of looking at the world, that it's important for them not to be for sale and to look at the big picture. It can be hard when people are that desperately poor.
Right.
But sometimes, even where countries, when they start to do better economically, they've been entrenched in the system of corruption for so long that it's sort of a habit.
That's part of the culture.
Exactly. There are places in the world where, you know, prosecutors and people in authority, they pay bribes to get their jobs in the first place, knowing that they're going to make it up later in bribes that they're going to extract from the population. And that's the kind of thing where we like to get in there and try to change those minds if we can. It's a very difficult thing to do.
Now, when you interviewed a lot of these officers that were in prison, and I imagine, you correct me if I'm wrong, that they came from different levels of law enforcement, both local, county, state, maybe even on the federal level. Were there any of them that were not remorseful, that felt like it was still their right? Or were most of the guys, like, now that they've been caught and they've saw what they lost, not just monetarily, but in the sense of their good name, their integrity, did you find most to realize that, hey, you know what, I was really stupid for doing that?
Sure. I would say most of them have that type of an attitude, that they've recognized that they've done something wrong. You know, they're always going to be, in any type of a profession, there's going to be some people that just don't get it. Sure. You know, I've had people that, one particular officer I'm thinking of, confessed to accepting bribes. We did a search warrant at his house, recovered all sorts of stolen property in his house, and he was on tape recordings besides. Ends up going to trial and is convicted by a jury. And I've heard through various other people involved with the court system that he just blames me for all of his undoing. You know, it's really sort of an absurdity, I think. But I have talked to quite a number of police officers who have said, you know what, if you could ever get me out of prison for even just a day to go speak to a police academy or a recruit school or something like that, where I could give my message and explain how I went wrong, I'd really love that opportunity. So we've done just that with this documentary film. And those officers, you've seen it, I think you'll agree, they get right down to a very basic level and talk about their mistakes, not blaming anybody else. You know, I'm the one who screwed up here, and pass that message on to other people.
Now, unfortunately, corruption in a governmental setting isn't just in law enforcement. I mean, you've dealt with corruption. Probably the most famous one locally, anyway, was like Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick in Detroit. So, how did you, I mean, what steered you in that direction in the first place? I mean, the FBI has their hands in a lot of things.
Yes.
What steered you into public corruption?
To be interested in public corruption?
Yeah.
Well, I went to Michigan State University.
Go
and
Green.
that's absolutely. My father was a policeman.
Oh, okay.
And one day and I'd always been interested in law enforcement in general, but I was sitting there reading the Detroit Free Press in the cafeteria at Michigan State, and I was reading about a story in Detroit where there was a police officer that was convicted of running the license plates of different people for a drug dealer. They were accepting bribes to try to find out who undercover officers were, which seemed to me to be about the most reprehensible thing I could think of.
Right.
And I thought, boy, wouldn't that be great to have that sort of job satisfaction to root out that kind of a problem. And years later, here I am doing the very same thing. So.
Yeah. You know, it's where did your father serve? If I may
In
ask?
Saginaw.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And
City of Saginaw.
he made retirement.
He did.
Made
Yeah.
the promised land.
Yeah, he's retired now.
Good for him. Good for him. Now, I saw also that you not only went to MSU, but you got your law degree from Thomas Cooley Law School, and even when you were working as a lawyer, you worked on the good side as a prosecutor.
Right. Right.
So you've always had kind of law enforcement in your blood.
Sure. Yeah, we had kind of limited options in my family. You had to be on the good side.
Yeah.
It'd be tough to come to Thanksgiving dinner and talk about going to the dark side.
Right.
But
Right.
I kid about that. I wouldn't want to live in a country that didn't have an adversarial judicial system.
Sure.
And certainly, we need good defense attorneys and that sort of thing. But for me, it was always all about law enforcement and solving crimes and
Right.
putting criminals behind bars. That's kind of the way we were molded in my house. So.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the other, some of the other cases that you've worked in over the years, and I assume they haven't all been in Detroit, even though this has been your focus. You've spent most of your, if not all your career here in Detroit, correct?
Sure.
But sometimes corruption goes across state and county lines and what have you. What are
Absolutely.
some of the other
Yes.
cases you've
yes,
worked
we've,
on?
I've gone to other cities and worked police corruption cases there, kind of taken the show on the road and so forth. I've done a lot of lecturing around the state and other places, and so sometimes it takes me to other cities, but by and large, my geographic jurisdiction's in Wayne County. So,
Okay.
but we have agents in smaller offices, which we call resident agencies, around the rest of the state of Michigan, one of which here is in Oakland County. That would
Okay.
cover the Oakland County jurisdiction. So, but other cases that I've worked on, I've had lots of police corruption cases, lots of, I had another case, you might remember I know you're a Detroiter, but if you remember Alonzo Bates, he was a city councilman that ended
Yes.
up going to prison. That was my case too. So, public figures like that, as well as a lot of police corruption cases that you probably seen when they hit the paper.
Yeah.
So.
Now, how does the FBI start to get involved? I mean, there's also other agencies, for instance, like a big agency like Detroit, they have their own internal affairs unit. State police has their own internal affairs unit. At what point does the local or the police department say, you know what, we want someone to come in from the outside, let's call the FBI, or do they sometimes call another police agency to do the investigating?
Frequently,
how do you guys get involved?
Yeah, they do. For us, we have a joint task force called the Detroit Area Corruption Task Force, and I have two Detroit police officers actually on my task force. They have desks right outside my office, and we work everything jointly with them. We don't work any corruption cases in the city of Detroit without them.
Okay.
So there are a lot of advantages to that.
Sure.
There are a lot of things, technical things about the job of being a police officer that I certainly would not understand without having a police officer on that
Right.
department advising me. So I would never go it alone unless we absolutely have to. You could conceive of a situation perhaps in a very small department where, if they had a pervasive corruption problem and they weren't cooperating with us, doesn't mean we're walking away.
Right.
We're certainly going to investigate something like that anyway.
Right.
But the vast majority of cases, by vast majority, I mean almost all of them that I've ever had, the police chiefs welcome our participation and our expertise and work jointly with us.
Well, that's
So,
good to hear.
yeah.
That's good to hear. Now, we focused on Detroit, and probably because they've been so high profile over the last few years. But corruption is a human condition. It's not a condition that's just for the city of Detroit.
Absolutely.
So do you find, even though the numbers may be larger in a metropolitan area because there's more people, does corruption go into the suburbs and into the rural areas as well?
Sure, without a doubt. I've arrested police officers in other cities in Wayne County besides the city of Detroit, and I'm certainly not here to pick on the city. It's just the biggest city in Michigan, and that's so we have the bulk of our work there. It's the largest police force too. But yeah, you're right. Federal agents, county deputies, state police officers. Nobody's immune from corruption.
No, absolutely.
Including the FBI. We've had some high-profile cases where FBI agents, probably heard of Robert Hansen, for example, sold secrets to the former Soviet Union and got people killed overseas. It's a stain on all of us to think that guy worked with us. So,
well, like you said, that's really not. I mean, some people may look at it as a reflection here, but it's not. It's just human nature. And I know we're running out of time, but real quick, you told me you're doing a show for. I did an interview for another show. Why don't you tell a little bit about that?
Sure.
Because the title was what? Greed?
American Greed.
And that's really kind of what motivates people.
Absolutely.
When
Greed's
they're corrupt.
almost always the motivator for this type of behavior. But it's supposed to air on June 4th at 10 o'clock on CNBC, and it's a show about the Kwame Kilpatrick case.
Okay.
I did an interview for that. So.
And give us a phone number if anyone wants to give you a call or give the FBI a call.
Sure, you can call the Oakland County Resident Agency, and I think we'll put that on a banner here. And in the office in Detroit is 313-965-2323.
Okay, Bob, hang on a minute. We're going to honor a fallen American hero. Folks, if you would, please look at your screen and keep in your thoughts and your prayers Deputy Sheriff Chad D. Shaw of the McCracken County Sheriff's Office in the great state of Kentucky. Deputy Sheriff Shaw suffered a fatal heart attack following an arrest earlier in the day. He had responded to an automobile accident when he discovered one of the drivers had an active warrant. He was able to place the driver into custody and complete the arrest, but he collapsed a short time later while assisting with the security at a meet and greet at the Community Christian Academy. He was transported to a local hospital where he passed away a short time later. This is a true American hero. He not only served in the state of Kentucky, he's also a son of Michigan. So we want to keep him in our thoughts and prayers. Also keep his wife and his 2 daughters in your prayers as well. And as I said, he is an American hero. He is also a U.S. Army veteran and served our great country in the United States Army. So for Deputy Sheriff Chad D. Shaw, we ask you to remember him, his wife, his children, his colleagues at the McCracken County Sheriff's Office, all the men serving in the military, and we say, goodbye, brother. Your memory will not be forgotten. Folks, we want to thank you for watching West Bloomfield 911. Once again, I'd like to thank our guest, Supervisory Special Agent Robert Beckman of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Bob, thank you for coming on the show.
Glad to be here.
And we thank you for watching, and please take care of each other. Be safe. Remember, tomorrow's promised to no one. You can always watch us on the television, but if you can't get us on the telly, tune in at civiccentertv.com on the internet. And on behalf of Chief Mike Patton and the men and women of West Bloomfield, I'm Officer Rick. I'll see you again on West Bloomfield 911.